everybody wants to get united. Like, what we gotta do is meet everybody on 149th Street at the bench.
Hey guys, welcome back to the bench, and also welcome to the very first video in our new How to Do Graffiti playlist. This is gonna be a handstyle tutorial. You're gonna learn all about graffiti's different fundamentals and how they apply to tags. And really, this video serves as a starting point. It's really the first step you'll take in your graffiti career, or it serves as a great update if you haven't really been practicing or studying the fundamentals and you need a little bit of a refresher. Alright, so let's start off with the thing that most graffiti artists make a huge mistake on. Myself included, don't worry, I'm not exempt from this either. And that is they add way too much style to everything that they do. I'm not kidding, I've been teaching for over 20 years at this point, and I can tell you firsthand, I've seen thousands of graffiti artists add way too much style because they have this idea of what graffiti is meant to look like in their head. They believe graffiti has to be this really bombastic, crazy thing where you got arrows and extensions popping out of everything, but you don't really need all that. In fact, what if I told you that that's exactly what's holding you back? That's exactly why a lot of people are finding graffiti difficult to learn. You see, here's the thing. Style is the exaggeration of the fundamentals. That's what style is in every single art form. It doesn't matter what art form it is we look at. But the key part is style is the exaggeration of the fundamentals while keeping the fundamental correct. That's what makes it style. And it's tricky because a mistake in art is very similar. It's almost identical. A mistake in art is exaggerating the same fundamentals in potentially the same ways, but the fundamental doesn't stay correct. And don't get me wrong, correct is an objective thing. If I draw this and tell you it's the letter H, not quite. But if you see this right here and I tell you that's the letter R, well, you can see that. That makes sense, despite the fact that there's style added to it. So that's the difference between style and a mistake. It's a really close, fine line, but that's the difference. And here's the issue with adding style. Adding style like this to your work and having those mistakes, really what it does is it reinforces practice bad habits and it makes it almost impossible to learn. That's all style does this early in graffiti. It's just visual white noise. So where do we begin? We begin with what is called basic structures. Now, basic structures are the letters in their most simple form. There's stuff we already know, right? There's stuff that we practiced in elementary school. We all know how to write these letters right here, but now we have to learn how to write them in the context of graffiti's fundamentals, which is why we want to start using these structures. These are also known as your skeleton hand in other letter-based art forms, and the skeleton hand is what people use in order to learn whatever letter-based art form it is that they're learning, in this case graffiti. But don't just pick up a pencil and start writing these letters flat out on the page. Pair this up with our lettering chart. Now, a lettering chart should look familiar to most of you guys because, once again, it's all something that we learned in penmanship, but now we have to learn how to use that in the context of graffiti's fundamentals. So follow me along here. The bottom line right here is called the baseline, and this is where the bottoms of our letters are going to reach. It's really common for brand new graffiti artists to kind of write their letters sloping up or write their letters sloping down. This creates a lot of issues, not only with negative space, but letter name weight. We don't want those issues, right? So baseline is where the bottoms of your letters are going to reach, and they don't go any further than that. Mean line, that's going to be the center of your letters. Things like the crossbar on an A or an H, or the center horizontal line on the capital letter E. Or how about the bowl of your R or P? They're going to connect at the mean line. They're going to come back to the stem at the mean line for the R and the P. Now this line up here, that's going to be the cap line, and the cap line is where we want the tops of our letters to reach. By using these three lines and lining our letter up properly on these three lines, that's going to ensure that our letters maintain good proportions. It's also going to ensure that our letters maintain a uniform weight amongst different letters within the name. Now obviously different letters are going to have different weights just out of the box, but if you're using this lettering chart and you've lined everything up properly, then that's not an issue at all. Also, as far as a letter name weight tip right here, try and make sure that each one of your letters encompasses the same width, the same kind of width of space. Not all letters can do this. For example, lowercase I is the weakest letter in the alphabet. The reason for that is because of how thin it is and how little space it takes up from left to right. So you do want to consider that, but that's kind of an outlier. Most letters are able to easily take up just as much space as whatever other letters are in the name. Now we left out two lines here, and that's the ascender and the descender line. These are really just kind of extra bits of space that we can use for our exterior details. So we're talking things like halos, quotation marks, crowns if you're a king, drop shadow or 3D if you're doing throwies and pieces, and even extensions if you have a really crazy hairstyle. Advanced graffiti artists can certainly dip their letters into the ascender or descender as well, but for now our focus is going to be to keep that letter on the baseline to the cap line. Now here's the next thing as far as this lettering chart is concerned. In graffiti we treat all lowercase letters as if they were uppercase letters. You see, the reason for that is because lowercase letters just don't have enough weight. They tend to also have a lot of negative space because, I mean, just check this out. If I drew this lowercase g, not only do we have a lot of negative space within the letter itself, but we also have negative space that it generates from the mean line to the cap line, seeing as it doesn't reach that area. Not only that, we also have additional negative space because it dips into the descender, and now that's going to make the space underneath, for example, the R, I, and M look like it's missing something. So for that reason, we raise that bad boy up and we make sure that it reaches from the cap line to the baseline, just like all the other capital letters do as well. This not only keeps the lowercase letters more proportioned with all the other letters, but it gives us a greater variety of structures to use, and in addition, it balances out, as you could guess, the negative space, as well as the letter name weight with all the other letters as well. So instead of drawing the Y, G, N, and P from the mean line down to the baseline, or from the mean line to the descender line, we're instead going to go from the cap line all the way down to the baseline for all of these letters. And letters like G, Y, and P, for example, they're going to have parts of their structure aligned back at the mean line. Now, you're going to want to dedicate this chart to memory, because obviously you're not going to have the time to draw this every single time you want to go ahead and do a tag. But when you're practicing and when you're first starting off, definitely draw the chart, use a ruler to draw the chart, whatever it is you got to do. Make sure the chart is nice and refined, and then do your letters on top of that chart. As you get better, as you get more comfortable, ditch the chart, dedicate it to memory, and see if you can still maintain the same proportions as when you had the chart. Once you can do that comfortably and your letters come out properly every time, then you can move into more advanced practices, which we'll talk later. Alright, so far we've taught a lot of the fundamentals, and if you feel like you learned something, then you're gonna love our How to Do Graffiti book. I can guarantee you, if you've been like kind of lost in graffiti, you've been lost and confused with the different tutorials out there and you don't know how to progress and how to find your style, or you feel like you're in a bit of a rut, then get rid of that frustration. Learn graffiti in the easiest and in the best way possible with our How to Do Graffiti book in the description down below. I guarantee you, it's exactly what you've been looking for. We've already helped thousands of people, and this book can help you too, because we are the only book on the market that teaches you each one of graffiti's fundamentals, and we do it to a university standard of depth. We go into a ridiculous amount of information that has never been talked about anywhere in the graffiti community. Certainly not any other graffiti books. And the best part is we have hundreds of pictures throughout the book that'll hold your hand through each lesson, making it very easy for brand new graffiti artists to follow along. And because of how in-depth we go, it's perfect for even advanced graffiti artists who are looking to refine their fundamentals or learn something new. Check out our digital copies at theartistblock.inc with physical copies over on Amazon, and be sure to save yourself some money with the Black Friday discount code that you can use for the ebook at theartistblock.inc. But let's get back to the tutorial for you guys. Now, when you're writing your letters, we really want to focus on refined, clean lines. I can't tell you how many brand new graffiti artists come in with some sloppy line work, some sloppy letters, and really what's happening here is our lines make shapes, and our letters are made out of those shapes. So if our lines are sloppy, then our shapes are sloppy, and then our letters are going to be sloppy as a result of that. But if we refine and we practice how to draw lines and how to draw shapes, then we can guarantee that we'll have clean letters as well. Take the time to practice those two things. You're gonna thank me in the end. Now here's the part where a lot of graffiti artists, you know, they do their tag and they look at it and they go, man, I don't know what it is, I don't know what's wrong with it, the flow is wrong, the flow is off, I don't like this tag. Or, I like the tag, but I messed up the flow. And here's a little secret to know about flow as far as graffiti is concerned. Flow is never the problem. Flow is never to blame, flow is never what went wrong in your handstyles, throwies, or even pieces. I know this is a handstyle tutorial video, but take that as a piece of advice for all graffiti. Flow is never the problem. Now the reason for this is because flow is a byproduct of our other fundamentals and how they came together. And the only way to mess flow up is to either A, mess up one of the other fundamentals, or B, add so much style to where you ended up messing up one of the other fundamentals. That's quite literally the only way flow messes up. It doesn't mess up any other way. But with that said, let's talk about what exactly flow is. So as far as the basics are concerned, there's really two different forms of flow. You have line uniformity and similarity, and if these pens represented lines, then the more uniform two lines are, the more they're gonna flow. And the more similar two lines are, once again, the more they're gonna flow. The more different two lines are, the less they're gonna flow. And then we have letter uniformity and similarity, which is essentially that same exact concept, but to more so the motif of the overall letter. Do I have a round bowl on my letter P and a round bowl on my letter R? Yes, well then those two are gonna flow. Is one bowl sharp and the other one more round? Yes, well then they're gonna flow less. Now the difference between letter uniformity and similarity and line uniformity and similarity is the fact that line uniformity and similarity is based on proximity. That means that if we have two lines that are similar and they're close together, well then they're gonna flow. But if we take those two same exact lines and we push them further away, now they're not going to flow. They're too far away to flow. Letter uniformity does not have this issue. But you know what's one thing that can mess up your flow real bad is letter name positioning. Now, letter name positioning kind of goes a little bit hand in hand with negative space management, so we'll kind of talk about these two at the same exact time. But letter name positioning is essentially how we position our letters, and as a result, how our name is positioned. Because, as you might imagine, the position of our letters is going to determine the position of our name. So are all your letters on the baseline, mean line, and cap line? Yes, that's standard letter name positioning. More advanced graffiti artists might dip a letter into the descender space, or into the ascender space. It's pretty common to see people also lean letters left and right, and that's also a letter position thing. As a brand new graffiti artist just getting into the art form, you really should be focused on keeping letters in the upright position and focusing more so on getting your clean lines and shapes and an accurate positive and negative space. Now, don't worry, in this tutorial series, we'll talk plenty about each one of these fundamentals in a lot more detail. And if you can't wait for those videos, then I already have another playlist which has all the tutorials you need in the description down below if you want to check those out if you're in a hurry. But negative space management is just as important as all the other fundamentals. You see, negative space management is essentially how we control the negative space that our letters create. For clarification's sake, other letter-based art forms have what's called kerning, and this is essentially the space between two different letters. In graffiti, negative space management refers not only to that very same space, but it also refers to the space within an individual letter. So, for example, if we look at the letter O, C, P, B, or N, the areas marked in red are that letter's negative space. The O, P, and B have what's called a closed counter, a fully enclosed negative space, surrounded on all sides. But the C and the N have what's called an open counter, and that's a partially enclosed negative space that is not closed in on all sides. So that's what negative space refers to, and it also refers to the negative space created by extensions, exterior details, things of that nature. Now, I know this example being shown on screen now is not a Handstyle, but I thought it did serve as a great example of negative space being created by other parts of your graffiti that are not necessarily the letter. Now, the very name of negative space management kind of puts the idea into new graffiti artists' head that they have to get rid of as much negative space as possible, and this is not at all the case. It's our job to control that space, and for the space that exists to be intentional. That right there, my friends, is the goal. Because we need negative space, we cannot have our letter structures without it. So as a brand new graffiti artist, we really want to focus on not only getting clean, refined letter structures and making sure that our letter structures look identical to what's shown here, but we also want to make sure that the negative space is also identical to what is shown here. Now, we don't ever want to just blindly copy and then just write the names and mindlessly kind of go through these exercises. We want to examine how much negative space is there. What happens when we kind of lack a little bit too much negative space, which we'll actually go into really soon in this video. But we want to examine the different fundamentals we're teaching in today's video and that we'll teach throughout the series, and we want to understand why these things work and why they're coming together the way that they do and why they're important. For example, if I have this letter A and I have these diagonal pieces connecting in their standard way, but I move that crossbar higher, what happens? Well, the negative space on the bottom portion in the open counter becomes larger, but the negative space in the closed counter becomes lessened to the point where we might actually lose structure. That's not really all that good. And negative space can be highly affected by our nib width. So when we're practicing, we want to be very attentive to the tools we're using. As you can see, a ballpoint pen has a very, very thin nib, and as a result, the lines that we draw are going to be pretty thin as well. And I know right now you're saying, John, that's obvious, that's self-evident. Why did you feel the need to tell us that? Well, because a lot of graffiti artists don't give this much thought, and they'll take a really thin nib like this and they'll do a very large hand style. And what happens when you do that is you end up with letters that have a ton of negative space, they lose flow as a result, they lose letter structure, and that space makes the letter look weak. On the opposite side of that spectrum, if we decide to use a nib width, that's what this topic is referred to, that's a lot larger, and we do the same exact size tag, well, now suddenly we don't have enough negative space. We lose letter structure because our letters bleed together and we can't see them as well. Our letters gain excess amount of weight, and we more than likely ruin the tag. So we want to make sure we're always being attentive to what tools we're using to write, and we want to make sure that we're writing our tag at a proper size for the tool. Now, this isn't like a rocket science, right? You can usually just eyeball it and you'll see, oh, that came out a little bit too big. I should probably use a different tool for that. But you always want to at least keep it in your mind. Now, so far we've talked about letter structure, negative space management, letter name weight, letter name positioning, and flow. One of these topics has a little addition to it, and that's letter structure. There's different kinds of letters that we can use to make our names, to make our tags, and to make things a lot more exciting, and that is variant structures. Variant structures are an alternate way to write your basic letters. So check out these basic structures. We all know them. That's a basic print font, right? If we step up the notch a little bit, we'll come come up to these more advanced structures called variant structures. Now, don't get me wrong, these are still very basic structures. There's nothing really stylized about these. They're just simply alternate ways to write a letter. And they're simply determined that way because they use certain strokes to be created. That's what determines if they're variant structures. You'll find all that in my book. Now, we have a full list of variant structures over on my website. You can check out the list for free. You'll find a link in the description down below directly to that list. It also comes with a full lesson about variant structures as well, so be sure to go ahead and check that out. But what's great about these is they give you a different starting point for your letter. If you have a name that's really pointed and you have one letter that's round, well, then you can use a more angular variant structure. And what's great about variant structures is that they flow with all basic structures. So you don't have to worry about using a variant structure and then thinking to yourself, oh, does that flow? The answer is yes, it flows. You just have to do it properly and you'll be squared away, you'll be clean. Now, let me be clear. If you're day one in graffiti, I do not recommend variant structures at all whatsoever for your practice. You can play around with them, you can try them out for fun, whatever the case is, but that's not practice. For practice, I recommend your basic structures. For intermediate graffiti artists and people who have already mastered clean lines, clean shapes, and you have a basic understanding of your basic letter structures, then yes, I recommend moving into variant structures. Now, your basic structures and your variant structures, they combine in order to make a category called base structures. Now, base structures are essentially just whatever letter you started with before adding style. Have you ever looked at somebody's hand style or throwy or piece and you thought, wow, holy crap, they stylized the living crap out of that thing? Well, no matter how crazy a letter is, it can always be broken down into a base structure, which that base structure, just as the name suggests, is the base that they started with before adding the style into the letter. Now, this video serves to introduce you guys to the fundamentals. This series is going to include a handstyle tutorial, a letter structure tutorial, negative space management, letter name weight, letter name positioning, and flow tutorial, as well as many more tutorials. So if you don't want to miss out on that, be sure to subscribe. And if there's anything you want to learn, be sure to let me know. I'll try to include it into this series. And of course, don't forget about our book in the description down below. Save yourself some money using the Black Friday discount code at theartistblock.inc. We got physical copies over on Amazon, digital copies on my website, theartistblock.inc. Both of those are in the description. And check out the best How to Do Graffiti playlist, which is another tutorial series we did last year, right up here, with more graffiti content right down here. And I'll catch you guys back here next week.